If you're a doctor working in the UK and you found an interest in emergency medicine and you want to apply for the next round of EM training, you've probably now established a bit of an idea about the application process and sitting the MSRA exam and then doing the interview. However, there isn't much information online about the actual process itself, what it entails, what you need to do in order to have a decent portfolio given the competitiveness of the applications nowadays, how to go on about organizing your MSRA exam preparation, and what kind of ways there are to actually prepare for the interview properly. So in today's video, I'll try and break down the day-to-day aspects of all three steps of the application process, in the hope that it gives you a bit of an idea of how you would go on about it. So I'll try and break down how I would go on about it if I went back in time. Just as a bit of a background about me, my name is Hassan. I'm an TCS Emergency Medicine ST2 trainee in Merseyside, and I came to the UK in April of 2022. That's when I started my first job in the NHS, and it was actually my first job ever. I had just graduated in 2021 and I was working in the emergency department, found it very interesting, and because I had my CREST form ready, I just applied in the same year, did the MSRA exam in January, and initially after the interview I wasn't matching into the spot, so I decided to apply for a trust grade job in a different hospital to improve my chances for the next year, but then subsequently matched in the last round in May, and so I started my training in August of 2023. So what I'm trying to say is that the process might not always be very straightforward. You might come across some difficulties, what people see as some disadvantages, but the point is to try and make the most of what you have, what opportunities you come across, and identify them, make the most out of them. If I can do it, you most certainly can. So let's get straight into it. The first thing is gonna sound quite obvious, but I will explain why it's very important. You're gonna set target dates, one of them being a list of things that you want on your portfolio by the time you apply for the EM training. The reason you do that is unless you have an actual idea of what you want to achieve by the time the application process is ready, there are a few things that are going to happen. One is you're gonna get a false sense that your application, what you have on your portfolio, is enough. Because EM training, unlike other specialties, the actual application doesn't need much. The essential and desirable criteria are not really that demanding. They're quite basic. But it's important to remember that after you successfully get the score that you want for your MSRA, you're going to go through an interview, and a good part of the interview is actually based on what your portfolio is like. What have you achieved in the time that makes you show a high level of interest in EM training and a high level of knowledge and skills to be prepared to start your specialty training, because they will look into that. So if you think of the time between now and your actual application process as an opportunity to really improve your portfolio so that it's ready by the time of the interview, that will most certainly expand what you're going to be doing. Now, unless you set target dates for the process, what could happen is that you reach the application process and you still are able to apply and sit the MSRA exam, but you have the very minimum amounts of requirements, which unfortunately might not do you well later down the line. This is obviously also very important when it comes to the MSRA exam, but we'll get to that in a bit. So if we break down the process into making the best portfolio that you can in the next couple of months, then stopping or slowing down working on that and just solely focusing on the MSRA, and once you're done with that, working on the interview, then what we're going to be first talking about is the actual portfolio. So it's important to be task focused, and what do I mean by that? Not only is the work demanding that you're in a day-to-day basis, but it's also the projects that you might decide to pick up on. Not all of them actually contribute to your application process, so you need to focus your energy and your time on the ones that are high yield for your application. So what are some of these? Basic courses like ALS and pediatric ALS. The ALS is essential, but the pediatric ALS would show that you're interested in EM training, so that's one thing. Another is audits. So if you're able to actually, you've got a few opportunities and choices here, and it depends on how much time you have left before the application process. One option is to just be part of a team and collect data for your audit. Another is to actually lead an audit and do one full cycle. I've got a video talking about how to make this process as quick as possible and try and finish it in 3 to 6 months. Or you could also be part of data collection for a national audit. A lot of emergency departments are actually involved in national audits, and they're asked to actually collect data for the NHS. So that on your portfolio, which would not only show that you are active when it comes to audits, but also that you are involved in audits that tackle national issues in the emergency department. So that will be useful and something that you can talk about in your interview. When it comes to teaching, because all the departments always have some active teaching, so if you are participating in giving some topics, covering some cases that you came across to your fellow colleagues, of course in a controlled environment, that will be very useful. You can also do the Teach the Teacher course. That will show that you're active when it comes to teaching. Okay. And something additional, which I understand is not always possible, I wasn't able to do it, so I'm not gonna claim that you should be doing this, is to sit the first specialty exam, the MRChem primary, before starting your MSRA exam preparation. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I was not able to do it, probably because, first of all, I didn't know that it was gonna be helpful, and second is, while working on the top 3 that I just mentioned, I didn't have any time left to sit the exam and still prepare for the MSRA. Okay, so this is a bonus. It just shows you're highly committed to the specialty, and I also want to give you a guide that is more relevant to you right now than just to me, because things have changed. It has gotten more competitive since I applied, even though it's only been 2 years. So I think anything that gives you an edge, you should consider doing it if you've got enough time. Now, of course, if you don't, there are other options. You could just attend online or in-person emergency medicine conferences in the UK. That would be something that you could talk about in your interview. And just as a summary on this section, what I would recommend is to be as quick and as efficient as possible in actually working on these different parts of your portfolio. So what do I mean by that? When you're applying for courses, don't just email one person or one course provider and wait for them to reply and then take it from there, and if they're not available, then move on to the next person. Maybe you've emailed somebody to start an audit and they haven't replied, so you're still waiting on that. The thing is, everything in the NHS is already quite slow. Unless you've got this sheer persistence in getting the things that you want, it's gonna really drag. Okay, so if I was doing this again, what I would do, and I had none of these, I would be contacting 3-4 people about different ALS courses across the region that I'm in, same for the PEDS ALS, and see who gets back first and try and get the first date available, because when I do, that's out of the way now. And in the time when I was doing that, I was already talking to somebody about an audit in person because they didn't reply to their email, getting an idea which audits are available, then moving on to the next person that I need to do the audit. Maybe dedicating one weekend where you say, I'm not going to do anything else but input the data for the audit, and that's ticked off. Now it's done. Now I've got more time. When I'm doing my teaching, I can do the teacher course or whatever. And when you get into that flow and you're getting things done quickly, you're gonna come across more opportunities that you will be able to actually use and attend. So let's say because you were efficient and you got things done in the early months of the year, or that by the time you decided to start the process, when you come across conferences, online conferences in the next couple of months and while studying for the MSRA, you could still attend them. By the time you get into the interview, you can still talk about them in your interview as a part of your commitment. And that's why it's really important to set deadlines, focus on only a couple of things and ignore everything else, and just be on top of things. Don't wait for people to get back to you at their own pace, at their own time. Be persistent, and that should increase how many things you have on your portfolio by the end of the process. So next up is the MSRA. Now, I'm sure there are many sources out there, and there's a lot of talk about which sources are the best. It really does also depend on your own background. Because I'm an IMG, I've not really had much experience with the situational judgment test part. So I didn't just do past medicine. I used that mostly for the medical part, but then I used MCQ Bank mostly for the SJT. That was the advice that was going around at the time. Now, there are a few more resources out there, but from what I've seen online, these two seem to still be the most useful. There are others like eMedica, I believe it's called, and it's more tailored towards how the questions are made, so you might want to use it maybe closer to the exam. So when it comes to the sources, you still have to sit down and think, okay, what's actually the most important to me? Because if you're a UK graduate, you guys have done SJTs many times and you're much more familiar with them, so you might be focusing more on the medical side, and so your choice might be different. The point is, pick your sources and then decide how much do I want to do it, how often, am I going to finish all the questions once or twice, and what's your method that you're going to use. Again, that's highly individual. Some people use flashcards, some people just want to do the questions again and again, but you have to decide from the beginning that you have a target of how many times you're going to do the questions or how many flashcards you're going to do, and then obviously the deadline being the day of the exam. And then sit down and have a look at your own rota. What does it look like for the next couple of months? Is it full of night shifts and weekends, or is it just a 9 to 5 mostly? Are there some months that are much more demanding when it comes to work than others? And then that way you can actually incorporate which topics that you find more difficult when you have more time in the rota, and leave ones that you know much more about during the weekends and night shifts and so on. And when you make a tailored plan, not only do you become more efficient and more targeted in preparing for the exam, but you're also less likely to burn out, you're more likely to retain what you're studying, and it also leaves you with a sense of confidence of achievement, because if you're struggling to complete the topics that you said you would on a daily basis because you've put difficult topics on difficult days, then it just becomes a cycle of not achieving what you want, and it really does affect your level of confidence by the time you reach the exam. So try not to get too involved in the interview process up until you've actually finished your MSRA exam and you've had a little bit of rest as well. And the reason I say that is, it might be quite obvious, but unless you score a very good score in the MSRA, you will not get into the interview in the first place. So there's no point distracting yourself with something that will come later down the line, but the main issue is the MSRA at the moment. So finish your exam, get some rest, and then try and just figure out as much data as you can about the interview. What questions do they ask, what topics do they want to talk about, and then put them all down in one place. Write down the questions, and then pick up your phone and try and record yourself. Somebody asks you that question, how would you answer it? Just talk as if you're talking to yourself, you are talking to yourself, and just see what kind of answers come up the first time. Maybe keep it unplanned, unscripted, and then look back at it at a different time. Assess a few things. Assess What topics did you talk about when you were asked? How was your tone? Were you talking way too quickly? Were you relaxed? Were you tense? Give yourself some feedback and then repeat the process. You're probably going to get asked about some medical assessment of a patient. But let's say you asked about the reason why you want to apply into emergency medicine training. If you're somebody who's going to just talk really quickly, get really anxious about it, and then eventually run out of ideas as well, even though you might have some particular reasons why you like emergency medicine training, on the spot you might be nervous and completely forget and omit some of these reasons. So it's important to go through the process where you essentially make the mistakes that you don't want to do in the interview, and then give yourself feedback, see how it is, and then record again in a couple of days, and now you're going to remember to incorporate these things into your answers the next time. Keep doing that, and then you can take it a step further. If you've got anybody that you know who is already in EM training, recently done the interview, then ask them if they could ask you a couple of questions, see how you answer them, and they could give you some feedback. That could also include consultants. It's not only limited to people who have recently done the interviews, because a lot of consultants are actually the ones doing the interviews in your own department. That is a possibility. So it's important that you get some feedback of them, see what consultants look for in these questions, and get more feedback, and then go back home, practice again, practice, and see where you got up to. And essentially that's a breakdown of how to go on about the process on a day-to-day basis. I really hope that this video has been useful to you. If you've got any questions, do drop them in the comments. I might have not covered everything, and I'll see you in the next video.